Bruno lay on the cold, sterile table of the small veterinary clinic, his once mighty frame now reduced to trembling frailty. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over his graying muzzle and drooping ears, and every shallow breath he took seemed to echo the finality of his condition. Dr. Collins, a gentle soul with decades of experience and sorrow etched in her eyes, held a syringe filled with a lethal dose meant to ease Bruno's suffering. The time had come to say goodbye to the loyal companion who had faithfully served for 16 long years. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. But just as the cold metal of the needle brushed against Bruno's skin, something miraculous happened. A deep, desperate howl erupted from his chest, a sound so raw and heart-wrenching that it silenced even the incessant beeping of the monitors. It wasn't a cry for help in the usual sense. It was a plea, a fervent demand to see his owner one last time. For Bruno had one true desire, to be reunited with his dearest friend, Harold. Harold, a retired railroad engineer whose rugged hands had once guided mighty locomotives across endless tracks, now lay miles away in a hospice facility, his body ravaged by terminal lung cancer. For decades, Bruno had been his steadfast companion more than a mere pet. He was Harold's guardian, confidant, and partner in countless adventures. Their bond had been forged on train platforms under starry skies, on long, dusty journeys across the country, and in quiet moments of shared solace during life's storms. Now, as fate wove its unpredictable thread, both were teetering on the edge of loss. In that tense, charged moment, Dr. Collins hesitated. The clinic staff, their faces etched with sorrow from having seen many goodbyes, exchanged bewildered glances. Bruno's piercing howl, full of longing and determination, filled the room like a clarion call. It was as if the old dog was summoning every ounce of strength to defy the inevitability of his fate. "He wants to see Harold," whispered one assistant, barely audible over the relentless hum of machinery. Outside, in a quiet suburban neighborhood blanketed by early evening shadows, Dorothy, Harold's devoted daughter, sat by the window, her thoughts heavy with worry for her ailing father. The news of Bruno's condition had reached her through hushed phone calls and tearful confessions from family members. Now, when the call came that an urgent situation had arisen at the clinic, Dorothy's heart raced with both dread and a glimmer of hope. Could it be that, after all this time, the unbreakable bond between Harold and Bruno was about to perform one final, miraculous reunion? Back at the clinic, the atmosphere was electric with suspense. Bruno's howl had not only interrupted the planned farewell, but had stirred something deep in everyone present. Dr. Collins slowly lowered the syringe, her own eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. "We can't let him go without fulfilling his wish," she murmured, her voice trembling as if afraid that even the sound of her words might shatter this fragile miracle. A flurry of activity ensued as the clinic staff sprang into action. Arrangements were made with the hospice where Harold was receiving care, a place so distant in both miles and circumstance that many doubted a reunion was even possible. Yet, driven by the relentless plea in Bruno's voice, every logistical obstacle was overcome. In a matter of hours, against all odds, a rescue team transported the frail but determined Harold to the clinic. When Harold was wheeled into the room, his eyes, though clouded by pain and fatigue, widened in disbelief. There, lying on the table, was Bruno, his loyal friend, his eyes still burning with the spirit of a hero. "Old pal," Harold whispered hoarsely, reaching out with trembling fingers. In that instant, as Bruno's head lowered and their gazes met, an indescribable warmth filled the room, a surge of connection that defied the cold sterility of the clinic. Dorothy and the others watched in awe as Harold's frail hand gently caressed Bruno's fur. The room, once heavy with the finality of loss, now pulsed with the bittersweet promise of reunion. Dr. Collins, her heart heavy yet inspired by the raw power of loyalty, canceled the injection. "Maybe, just maybe, this is not the end," she said softly, echoing the hope that had blossomed in every soul present. In that unpredictable, emotional twist of fate, Bruno's desperate howl had achieved the impossible. Against a backdrop of terminal illness and impending farewell, love had bridged the gulf between life and death. The old German shepherd and his cherished owner had been given one last moment together, a moment that redefined what it means to be loyal, to fight for love, even when time itself seems to conspire against us. For Harold, Dorothy, and everyone touched by this tale, that day became a testament to the enduring power of companionship, a reminder that, even in our final hours, the bonds we share can spark miracles. And as the echoes of Bruno's howl faded into a profound, gentle silence, those who witnessed it knew that some loves, no matter how battered by time, never truly die. Harold's heart pounded in his frail chest as he listened to the urgent voice on the phone, the sound of distant sirens and a clinic's intercom blending into a surreal cacophony. In the quiet, antiseptic room of a modest veterinary clinic, Bruno the loyal, aging German shepherd, who had once been a fearless rescuer, lay weakly on the cold metal table. His mighty frame, once full of vigor and strength, had now withered to a trembling shell, his every shallow breath a battle against time. Dr. Collins, a gentle yet determined veterinarian with eyes that had seen too many farewells, held a syringe filled with a lethal solution meant to offer Bruno a painless escape from the relentless suffering. But just as Dr. Collins was about to press the plunger, something unexpected shattered the silence. A heart-wrenching howl, raw and desperate, erupted from Bruno's chest. The sound reverberated through the room, freezing every soul present. It wasn't a cry for help in the usual sense. It was a fervent plea, a final, soulful demand to see his owner, to bridge the vast gulf that separated them. For Harold, whose life had been ravaged by terminal cancer and who now languished in hospice care far from this sterile chamber, had long been considered unreachable. And yet Bruno's howl carried a power that defied all logic. It was as if the old dog could feel, even from the depths of his failing body, that his beloved Harold was slipping away, miles away yet achingly near in spirit. In that breathless moment, Dr. Collins's hand trembled, the syringe hovering uncertainly above Bruno's fragile fur. "Hold on," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "He's not ready to go yet." Before anyone could speak, the clinic door burst open. Dorothy, a nurse whose compassionate eyes had seen more miracles than despair, stood there, foam clutched tightly in her shaking hand. "You need to stop," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Harold, he's coming." Dr. Collins frowned, disbelief and hope mingling in her gaze. "That's not possible," she whispered, almost to herself. "Harold is in hospice. He shouldn't be able to move." But the nurse's frantic nod and whispered words over the phone confirmed it. Harold, against all medical advice and despite his failing strength, had refused to remain confined to his bed. He was determined he must see Bruno one last time. Outside, the world moved in slow, uncertain steps. Harold, his body weakened by relentless cancer, had defied the odds. Nurses at his hospice had pleaded with him to stay, but his spirit, fueled by decades of devotion to Bruno, refused to be extinguished. With a mixture of pain and resolve, he had pushed himself into a wheelchair. Every bump on the uneven hospital floor was a brutal reminder of his fragility, yet with each agonizing movement, his determination grew. "I have to see him," he rasped, his voice a fragile thread of hope amidst the chaos. Back at the clinic, the atmosphere crackled with suspense. Bruno's eyes, though clouded by age, burned with an ember of renewed life as he shifted slightly on the table. His front paw twitched a silent plea, a testament to the will that refused to fade. Dr. Collins, still gripping the syringe, lowered it slowly, as if realizing that in this moment, time itself was bending to the power of loyalty and love. "We wait," she instructed softly, her voice quivering as she set the lethal injection aside. The room exhaled as one collective heartbeat, suspended between loss and the promise of one final reunion. Minutes later, amidst hushed murmurs and the frantic tapping of phone keys, an ambulance roared into the clinic's parking lot. In what felt like an eternity, Harold was wheeled through the clinic's doors. His eyes, dimmed by pain yet alight with a desperate hope, searched the room until they met Bruno's. In that instant, the sterile clinic transformed into a sanctuary of pure, unspoken emotion. Harold's trembling hand reached out, weakly caressing Bruno's muzzle. "Old friend," he whispered hoarsely, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm here." Bruno's ears perked up, And with a final surge of strength that defied his failing body, he lowered his head so their eyes locked a gaze filled with a lifetime of shared adventures, hardships, and love. Dorothy stood nearby, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, while Dr. Collins and the assembled staff watched in a reverent hush. The miracle was unfolding before them. Against all odds, the loyal bond between a dying hero and his steadfast companion had defied the expected end. Dr. Collins, her voice soft yet resolute, announced, "We're not administering the injection. Bruno must live this final moment with his owner." The decision, born of raw emotion and the undeniable power of love, hung heavy in the air. Outside, the night was filled with the distant wail of sirens and the soft murmur of hope. In that sacred moment, Harold and Bruno shared one last transcendent reunion, a silent promise that even in the face of inevitable loss, love could bridge the chasm between life and death. For Harold, Dorothy, and everyone in that room, that night was more than a delay of the inevitable. It was a testament to the enduring, unpredictable magic of loyalty. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful miracles occur when the human spirit and the loyal heart of a dog intertwine, defying all expectations and lighting the darkest night with a beacon of hope. Harold's frail body trembled as he clutched the thin hospital blanket, every fiber of his being urging him to move despite his failing strength. In the dim corridor of the hospice, the distant sound of sirens and hurried footsteps mingled with the persistent beeping of monitors, a constant reminder that time was running out. Meanwhile, at the small veterinary clinic on the edge of town, Bruno, the old German shepherd who had spent 16 long years saving lives and guiding his master through countless dangers, lay on the cold steel table. His once vigorous form had dwindled to a fragile shell, and the monitors showed a heartbeat that, though weak, still beat with stubborn defiance. Dr. Collins, whose gentle hands had administered goodbyes far too many times before, held a syringe filled with a lethal dose meant to spare Bruno from further suffering. The sterile lights cast harsh shadows on Bruno's graying muzzle and drooping ears, painting a picture of inevitable loss. But just as Dr. Collins raised the plunger, something in Bruno stirred. A deep, guttural howl erupted from his chest, raw and desperate, cutting through the room's oppressive stillness. It was not a cry for help in the usual sense. It was a heartfelt plea, a demand for one last reunion. Bruno was calling for Harold, his beloved owner, whose own battle with terminal illness had left him confined in a distant hospice, barely clinging to life. In that heartbeat of an instant, Dr. Collins's hand faltered. The syringe, meant to deliver a peaceful release, now felt like an instrument of cruelty. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of the moment. The veterinary technicians exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes fixed on the aging dog whose howl seemed to echo the sorrow and hope of a lifetime. Outside, Dorothy, one of the dedicated hospice nurses, had been monitoring Harold's condition. Her phone vibrated urgently with the news that, defying all expectations, Harold had mustered the strength to rise from his bed. The message was nearly impossible to believe. Harold was on his way to the clinic, determined to see Bruno one final time, even though his own body was ravaged by cancer. Back in the clinic, the tension reached an almost unbearable peak. Bruno's vital signs, which had been steadily declining for hours, suddenly began to stabilize. His breathing, though still shallow, evened out slightly, as if buoyed by an unseen force. Dr. Collins peered at the monitors, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They're stabilizing," she murmured, almost to herself. The sight sent a ripple of hope through the room, a hope that seemed to defy the relentless march of time. Just then, the ambulance screeched to a halt outside the clinic, its red and blue lights slicing through the night. Paramedics rushed into the building, their faces set in grim determination. "He's coming," one of them called out, confirming what Dorothy had already heard. Harold was on his way, fighting against every obstacle, fueled by a desperate need to be with his loyal friend. Inside the clinic, the atmosphere shifted from despair to a fragile optimism. Bruno, still lying on the table, seemed to sense the impending arrival of his owner. His eyes, though clouded by age, burned with a fierce, unspoken hope. Every muscle in his weakened body tensed as if summoning one last surge of strength. Dr. Collins, now filled with renewed resolve, gently set the syringe aside. "We wait," she instructed quietly, her voice carrying a weight that silenced even the incessant beeping of the machines. Meanwhile, Harold was being hurried along the corridor. Every bump in the narrow hallway sent a jolt through his worn body, but his determination remained unshaken. Nurses pleaded softly, urging him to rest, yet his frail hands clutched the rails as if his very survival depended on reaching the clinic in time. His vision blurred, and the room spun around him, but he fought through the agony. "I must see him," Harold rasped, his voice a fragile whisper of a promise that he would not let his best friend die alone. At long last, Harold was wheeled through the clinic doors into the waiting area, where the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Dorothy stood nearby, her eyes shimmering with tears as she watched the reunion unfold. The moment the door swung open, Harold's weary eyes locked onto Bruno's. Time seemed to suspend every sound, every breath, every heartbeat fell away, until only the bond between man and dog remained. Harold's hand reached out slowly, his fingers trembling as they brushed against Bruno's coarse, familiar fur. "Old friend," he managed to whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here." In that instant, something profound happened. Bruno's tail gave a tentative wag, his head lowered in a gesture that spoke of memories and shared hardships. The old dog's eyes, though weak, flickered with a spark of recognition, as if he knew that his master had defied the odds to be by his side. Dr. Collins and her team watched with bated breath as Harold was gently lowered next to Bruno. The room, which had been filled with the cold precision of medical equipment, now pulsed with an unexpected warmth, the warmth of reunion, of loyalty, of life-defying death. A nurse adjusted Harold's position, ensuring that his fragile state was respected, while Dorothy and others stood in silent awe of the moment. For Bruno, the world seemed to hold its breath. His once steady heartbeat, now measured and soft, continued to beat as if propelled by the love he felt for Harold. With a final, soft whimper, Bruno moved his head toward Harold, a silent promise that he would not let go until they had both found a measure of peace. "You did good, buddy," Harold murmured, his voice cracking with the weight of their shared journey. In that tender, unpredictable moment, both man and dog reaffirmed their unbreakable bond, a bond that had carried them through countless storms and would, perhaps, help them face whatever the future might hold. In the hushed stillness of the clinic, as the monitors continued their quiet symphony, it became clear to everyone present that this reunion was no mere coincidence. It was a miracle born of unwavering loyalty and the raw, unpredictable power of love, reminding us all that even when hope seems lost, the heart's quiet determination can defy fate and kindle a spark that outshines even the darkest night. Harold's trembling hands clutched the thin hospital blanket as he sat beside the cold metal table in the quiet veterinary clinic. In that solemn room, the only sounds were the low beeps of monitors and Bruno's shallow, labored breaths. The loyal German shepherd, who had once been a fierce protector and rescuer, now lay frail, his once glorious coat dull and his eyes clouded with age. Dr. Collins, with sorrow etched on her face from years of witnessing goodbyes, held a syringe filled with a lethal dose intended to free Bruno from his suffering. Yet, in that heart-stopping moment, as the cold needle approached, Bruno let out a desperate, soul-wrenching howl that silenced every device in the room. It was a cry not for help, but a plea, a final, ardent request to see his owner. For Bruno, his life's purpose had always been intertwined with Harold's. Their bond had been forged over decades of shared triumphs and heartaches, from stormy nights at rescue sites to quiet mornings on the porch. Now, as fate orchestrated an unlikely twist, Bruno's howl pierced the clinical silence. Dr. Collins's hand faltered, and she slowly lowered the syringe, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We must wait," she murmured, her voice heavy with emotion, as if recognizing that this was no ordinary farewell. Outside, the corridors of the hospice echoed with the determined shuffle of wheels and hushed voices. Dorothy, a kind-hearted nurse who had watched over Harold for many months, had received urgent news. Against all odds, Harold had refused to remain confined to his frail bed despite his terminal illness, and was now being wheeled toward the clinic. Every bump along the sterile hallway was a battle against pain and exhaustion, yet Harold's eyes burned with the single-minded purpose of reuniting with his cherished companion. Inside the clinic, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and quiet hope. Bruno's weak heartbeat, which had been faltering for hours, suddenly steadied as if fueled by an unseen force. His shallow breaths deepened ever so slightly, and for a brief, miraculous moment, it seemed as though the old dog was drawing strength from the promise of one last reunion. Dr. Collins, along with her dedicated team, exchanged glances filled with a mix of wonder and trepidation. They knew the odds were slim, yet something in Bruno's soulful eyes said he was not ready to leave, not when his best friend was on the way. Then, as if destiny had finally aligned, the doors burst open. An ambulance screeched to a halt, its lights slicing through the darkness. Paramedics hurried inside, their faces set in determined lines. "He's coming," one of them announced, as they wheeled a frail Harold into the clinic. Though weakened by the relentless grip of cancer, Harold's eyes sparkled with an unwavering resolve. Every movement was slow and pained, but his heart surged with hope at the thought of seeing Bruno once more. When Harold reached the room, time seemed to slow. His weary eyes met Bruno's, and in that silent exchange, decades of shared history and unspoken promises flowed between them. Harold's hand, shaking yet resolute, reached out to stroke Bruno's graying fur. "Old friend," he croaked, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. You can rest now." At those words, something stirred in Bruno. His tail gave a tentative wag, and his eyes, though dim, sparked with the light of recognition. The air in the room, heavy with the sorrow of impending loss, now vibrated with the fragile warmth of reunion. Dorothy stood quietly in the background, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched the miraculous scene unfold. Dr. Collins, her professional composure mingling with palpable empathy, gently repositioned Harold so that he could lean closer to Bruno. The monitors continued their soft beeping, each sound a reminder of the passage of time and the delicate balance between life and death. Yet in that room, all that mattered was the connection between a man and his dog, a bond so deep that it defied the cruel hands of fate. Harold's fingers trembled as they brushed against Bruno's side, and in that touch, memories of long nights on duty and quiet moments of solace on a battered porch reawakened. Bruno's breathing, though still shallow, grew steadier, and his eyes held a spark of life that told a story of loyalty and unwavering courage. "You've done so well, Bruno," Harold whispered, his voice breaking as he recalled the countless times the brave dog had risked everything to save lives. "You waited for me. You never gave up." In that sacred moment, the clinic seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Collins stepped back, her eyes misted over, as she realized that this was not merely a postponement of an inevitable end, it was a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty. Bruno, the once indomitable canine hero, had summoned the strength to defy the relentless tide of time, all in a desperate bid to see his owner one last time. For Harold, the reunion was both a final embrace and a bittersweet victory. As he sat there, holding on to Bruno's fragile warmth, he knew that their journey together was nearing its end. Yet, in that moment, amid the quiet hum of medical machines and the soft murmur of hearts breaking and mending, love had triumphed over despair. It was a reminder that even in our darkest hours, the bonds we share can spark miracles, defying the inevitability of loss and lighting the way forward, even if only for a fleeting, unforgettable moment. Harold's frail body trembled as he sat in the quiet hospital room, the soft beep of monitors punctuating the stillness. Beside him on a cold metal table lay Bruno, the loyal German shepherd, whose long life of heroic service was now drawing to a close. The room was heavy with the unsaid, every heartbeat echoing the relentless passage of time. Dr. Collins, whose gentle touch had comforted many in their final moments, stood nearby, her hand poised with a syringe intended to ease Bruno's suffering. Yet before the lethal injection could be given, an almost imperceptible shift occurred, a deep, shuddering sigh from Bruno that spoke of a desire to hold on just a little longer. Harold leaned in, his eyes locked on Bruno's weary, soulful gaze. "You don't have to fight anymore, old friend," he murmured softly, his voice barely audible. The weight of decades, the shared nights of laughter and peril, the quiet moments of unspoken understanding hung between them. Harold's own body had been ravaged by illness. Every movement, Every breath was a battle he fought with unwavering determination. Now, with Bruno's final hours upon him, Harold felt the bitter sting of approaching loss like a shadow at his back. In that fragile moment, as Harold's trembling fingers brushed the soft, graying fur around Bruno's ears, a subtle shift rippled through the room. Bruno's once resolute breathing grew a fraction steadier. His heartbeat, though slowing, pulsed with a quiet defiance. It was as if Bruno, despite his failing body, had summoned the last vestiges of strength to let his beloved owner know that he was still there, still fighting to be with him. Outside, Dorothy and the nursing staff rushed to Harold's side as news spread that he had defied every expectation and was on his way to the clinic. Their hurried footsteps and whispered reassurances blended with the clinical beeps and murmurs of the room. But inside, the focus was singular, a bond that had weathered the storms of life, now facing its ultimate test. Dr. Collins glanced at the monitors, her heart heavy with the familiar ache of final farewells. "He's stabilizing," she said, her voice trembling with both relief and sorrow. The data showed that Bruno's vitals, once failing, had managed to hold on miraculously, if only for a few precious moments. But even as that fragile stability took hold, the inevitable truth loomed. Bruno's strength was waning. His time was nearly up. Harold, barely conscious yet fueled by a force deeper than his failing body, summoned every ounce of willpower. With a shuddering exhale, he whispered, "I'm here, Bruno. I'm not leaving you." His voice cracked as he pressed his forehead gently against Bruno's, the closeness a silent promise of eternal companionship. For a long, heart-wrenching minute, nothing else mattered: the room, the machines, even the ache of impending separation. Then, as if the old dog had heard Harold's plea, Bruno's eyes flickered with recognition. His tail, so long silent, gave a feeble wag. In that fleeting, unpredictable moment, Bruno's gaze seemed to say all the things words could not express: gratitude, love, and the bittersweet acceptance of the end. His breathing grew slower, each exhalation softer than the last, until finally, with one last shuddering sigh, Bruno closed his eyes. The monitors fell silent, their rhythmic beeps replaced by an unbearable stillness that blanketed the room. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears as she watched the scene unfold, her heart breaking for both Harold and Bruno. Dr. Collins stepped forward, her expression one of resigned sorrow and profound respect. "He waited for you, Harold," she said, her voice a quiet tribute to the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. "He fought for this moment until the very end." Harold's chest heaved with a mix of grief and gratitude. Though his own body was failing, he had managed, through sheer will and the power of love, to be there for his best friend in his final moments. In that silent, sacred space, amidst the fading echoes of Bruno's last heartbeat, Harold realized that their journey together had been a testament to the unyielding power of loyalty, a reminder that sometimes the bravest fight is simply to be together, even as the world slips away. And so, in that moment of profound stillness, Harold held on, cherishing the memory of Bruno's enduring spirit, a spirit that, even in death, would forever light the path of those who believed in love beyond all endings. The clinic's clock ticked relentlessly, each second echoing like a solemn drumbeat through the quiet, sterile room. Every soul present felt the weight of fate upon their shoulders, as if the very air was heavy with the finality of a lifetime's bond. Dr. Collins stood by the bedside, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she surveyed the monitors and the hushed assembly of staff. In that charged silence, she finally broke the stillness with a deep, steadying breath. With measured steps, she approached Harold's gurney, where his weary hand, despite his failing strength, was still clutched tightly to the blanket draped over him. Carefully, she lifted Harold's trembling hand and gently placed it over the lifeless form of Bruno, the loyal companion who had shared in every joy and every peril for over 16 years. "They belong together," Dr. Collins murmured softly, her voice resonating with both reverence and sorrow. Outside, the storm that had threatened the horizon for hours finally began to ease, and the soft patter of rain against the window offered a gentle counterpoint to the emotional tempest inside. The monitors displayed Bruno's fragile heartbeat, once fierce and steady, now reduced to a slow, feeble rhythm that seemed to be ticking away his final moments. In that moment, Harold, whose own battle with terminal illness had drawn him ever closer to the edge, felt a surge of determination and deep, abiding love. He whispered, "You don't have to fight anymore, old friend. I'm here. You can rest now." Bruno's eyes, though dim and clouded by age, flickered with a spark of recognition. For a long while, he had clung desperately to life, his body defying reason, as though summoning every last breath to keep his master by his side. Now, as if acknowledging Harold's heartfelt plea, Bruno released a deep, shuddering sigh. His chest rose and fell in slow, measured beats until, with one final, quiet exhalation, he slipped into eternal peace. The sound of that last breath sent a ripple of shock through everyone in the room. Emily, a young veterinary assistant, covered her mouth in disbelief, while the receptionist, unable to bear the sight, turned away, her shoulders shaking. Dr. Collins closed her eyes and exhaled slowly through her nose. Though she had witnessed many such farewells in her long career, nothing could prepare her for the raw, piercing grief of this moment. "He waited for you, Harold," she said softly, her tone a mix of sorrow and awe. "He fought for this until the very end." Harold's face, lined with decades of hardship and love, was a mask of quiet resolve. Despite the agony coursing through his frail body, he remained rooted beside Bruno. His fingers, once strong enough to steer mighty engines and brave raging fires, now trembled as they brushed against the soft, fading fur of his dearest friend. "I'm proud of you, Bruno," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of the memory and the pain. "You did so well, my boy." As the room absorbed the crushing silence that followed, the paramedics outside hustled in with urgency. They had just managed to transport Harold against all odds from his hospice to the clinic, determined to give him the chance to be with Bruno one last time. In the dim light, Harold's eyes, though sunken and pained, shone with a fierce determination to honor the bond they had shared. Every bump in the ambulance's journey had been a brutal reminder of his own mortality, yet he clung to the hope that this final reunion would ease the sorrow of parting. Dr. Collins, still standing beside Harold, gently adjusted the monitors as the paramedics wheeled him closer to Bruno's resting place. "We must let him go peacefully," she murmured, her words a fragile compromise between medical necessity and the unyielding spirit of loyalty. Outside, the rain's soft rhythm continued, as if the heavens were weeping along with every heart in that room. In that sacred moment, as Harold's hand remained tenderly entwined with Bruno's cooling fur, a silence profound and resonant fell over the clinic. It was a silence that spoke of memories forged in fire and danger, of nights spent on broken glass and long, quiet drives home. It was a silence that conveyed that some bonds, once formed, are unbreakable, even in the face of death. Harold's eyes closed slowly, not in resignation, but in a deep, abiding gratitude. "You gave me everything, Bruno," he whispered, his voice scarcely audible, "and now we'll meet again someday." Though his own strength was fading, in that final unspoken promise, he felt a bittersweet peace. The staff, the paramedics, and even the quiet hum of the machines bore witness to that final chapter of an extraordinary bond, a firefighter who had risked his life countless times, and the faithful dog who had saved so many, now united in spirit for one last moment. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a tender calm as if the world itself was paying homage to a love that transcended all boundaries. And in that stillness, Harold and Bruno's story of loyalty, sacrifice, and the indomitable power of friendship etched itself into the hearts of everyone who bore witness, a testament to a bond that would never be forgotten. In today's fast-paced world, where change is constant and uncertainty can sometimes feel overwhelming, the story of Harold, Bruno, and Dr. Collins serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of loyalty and the beauty of shared moments even in the face of inevitable loss. Just as Bruno, the faithful German shepherd, clung to life until his final moments to be with his dearest friend Harold, many of us encounter times when our inner strength is tested by circumstances that seem insurmountable. In our modern lives, we often experience separation from loved ones due to distance, illness, or the relentless march of time. And yet, like Harold's determination to reunite with Bruno, we find that the bonds of love and friendship can propel us forward, even when hope appears fleeting. The gentle, tear-filled reunion in the clinic, where Harold, despite his own frailties, managed to be with Bruno one last time, reflects the universal truth that the connections we form, whether with family, friends, or even a beloved pet, are the anchors that keep us grounded when life's storms threaten to sweep us away. In our current lives, as we navigate challenges such as chronic illnesses, the loss of long-held dreams, or the loneliness that can sometimes accompany aging, the story illustrates that there is solace in knowing that we are not alone. It teaches us to cherish every moment with those who matter most, to hold on even when the odds seem stacked against us, and to find strength in the memories and love that have shaped our journey. Just as Bruno's final howl defied the inevitable, urging Harold to fight on despite his own failing health, we too can draw inspiration from the simplest acts of devotion, a warm smile from a stranger, the gentle touch of a friend's hand, or even the silent support of a cherished pet. The lesson is clear. In a world dominated by fleeting digital connections and fast-moving trends, it is the enduring personal bonds that truly define our existence and give our lives meaning. These relationships, built over years of shared hardship and joy, remind us that our true strength lies in our capacity to care for one another and to hold on to hope, even when everything seems lost. Ultimately, the story of Harold and Bruno teaches us that life is not measured by the grand gestures or the monumental achievements, but by the quiet, intimate moments of connection that illuminate our darkest hours and remind us that even in the face of sorrow, love endures. So as we move forward in our own lives, let us remember that every act of kindness, every shared moment, and every heartfelt goodbye is part of a larger tapestry, a tapestry woven with threads of loyalty, courage, and the timeless promise that no one, no matter how battered by life, ever truly walks alone. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more tales that inspire and move us. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next story.